What up everyone, Shark here. Welcome back to the channel. Got another guide for you guys today. This time we are talking about all things air defense and anti-air. I'm going to go over the different air defense units and their roles within the game. We're going to talk about the targets, helicopters and airplanes, and how that impacts which weapons you should choose in which situation. Then we're going to do a detailed overview of the different units available to both the American and the Russian factions. We'll talk a little bit about deck building considerations, and along the way, we'll have several case studies in effective or ineffective anti-air employment and talk about how to build an air defense network with your team. Without further ado, let's get to it. So obviously, we're going to spend quite a bit of time in the armory talking about the different anti-air platforms. And I generally break the anti-air platforms into 4 categories. So there's your long range, if you're military nerd, your IADS, your integrated air defense systems. These are your heavy SAMs. Then you have your SHORAD, or your short range air defense. You have your point defense, and then you have your MANPADS, your infantry borne rocket systems. But before we get into the stats for all of these different anti-air platforms, we have to better understand the targets. So let's do a brief overview of helicopter and aircraft armor and HP so we can better understand the efficacy of these anti-air platforms. So let's start with aircraft. Now, the majority of aircraft in Broken Arrow have 20 health, and as you can see, no armor. What this means is that because almost all anti-air weapons are explosive penetration, if there's no armor, they are going to do that max damage value. Remember, for explosive penetration, if the penetration is equal to the armor value, you only get half of the damage. But against most airplanes in the game, that's not really going to be an issue. They're going to do this max damage value. Other things you want to look at, obviously the stealth rating has to do with how soon the airplane is detected. Then countermeasures up here, the more countermeasures, the more likely the airplane is to be able to dodge missiles effectively. And then here you have ECM. This is your jamming. Essentially, the way you think about this is it's a flat reduction in incoming missiles opportunity to hit. So when the missile selects the target and enters the terminal phase of its guidance, which we'll talk about, there's basically a dice roll. And so in the case of the Su-57 here, there's a 20% chance that the missile, when it goes for terminal guidance on the Su-57, will simply miss outright. For heavier aircraft, they will have more than 20 HP. So for what I call light heavies, so the Tu-22 or this AN-72, it's a kind of a light transport. You see they have 25 HP each. The Tu-142, the Tu-160 has 30. And then same thing on the US side. The C-130s, the C-17s are all going to have 30 HP. Same thing with the bombers. And essentially, this is just part of the game's balance to ensure that none of these aircraft can be one-shot, even by the heaviest SAMs. The third category are your drones. They have between 10 and 15 HP. Basically, the way it works is if it's a low-altitude drone, like the Shadow, the Four-Post, the Corsair, it's got 10 HP. If it's a high-altitude drone, like here the Predator, the Sentinel, the Reaper, the Orion, it's going to have 15 HP. And that's essentially to give it just a little bit more staying power, but still make it easily destroyable by the heavier SAMs in a single shot. And then lastly here in the airplanes, there are 2 exceptions. The A-10 Thunderbolt, and for the Russians, the Su-25, available from 2 different specializations. Both have 15 armor. And so what this really does, it's not going to have a huge impact against the heavier vehicle-based anti-air or the heavy SAMs, but it will provide a little bit of additional durability against MANPADS, which we'll talk about later. Now, in contrast to the airplanes, helicopters all have some armor value, and it basically falls into one of 3 categories. You have light armor, which are your smaller attack helicopters and your utility helicopters. Their HP varies, but for the most part, you'll see 8 to 12 on the lighter attack helicopters, and then about 18 on your cargo variants. You have your medium armor, which is on almost all of your attack helicopters, 20 armor, 15 HP, the one exception being the MH-47 from the Special Operations specialization on the US side, has 20 armor, even though it's a cargo craft, and has 18 HP. And then on the Russian side, they have 2 heavy attack helicopters, The KA-52, both the Alligator and the Katran variant, as well as the Mi-28 in both of its variants, the Mikhailich and the Ochotnik. 30 armor, still 15 HP, but that 30 armor is going to make a pretty significant difference in durability. The other thing to keep in mind, helicopters do also have ECM and countermeasures. The countermeasures on the KA-52, 25% ECM is the best countermeasures available, even to include the Comanche. So unlike some of the stealth aircraft, the Comanche stealth is primarily in its ability to hide via its stealth rating, not in its ECM and countermeasures. Those are relatively standard with some of the other attack helicopters. Okay, now that we've gone over the targets and their setup, before we get into individual systems, what I want to do is kind of talk through the shots to kill, because this is going to really inform what you choose where and where the different cutoffs and fall off points are. So here in this table, what I have is the targets for helicopters on the left-hand side, and then the different weapon systems across the top, starting from weakest to strongest, with a bunch of different examples here. You'll notice that for the US SHORADs, I don't have anything besides the Hellfire. That's because almost all the US SHORADs really rely on the Stinger, which has the same stats as the MANPAD team. So starting with the light helicopters, these are 10 armor and 8 to 10 HP. For the most part, you'll see Igla, 2 shots to kill, Stinger, 2, sometimes 1, usually 2 shots to kill. All the vehicle SHORADs systems are 1 shot to kill on these light helicopters. And then obviously your heavy SAMs can't engage helicopters. For the cargo helicopters, which also only have 10 armor, they have a little bit more HP. So this means that the MANPADS, Iglas, Stingers, Verbas, 3 shots to kill. Everything else, the vehicle-based systems, 2 shots to kill. The medium attack helicopters across the board are 2 shots to kill, except against the Igla, right? So these really are your American attack helicopters and some of the lighter Russian attack helicopters. 20 armor, 15 HP, can basically take 2 hits, except for the Igla, which requires 3. And then your heavy helicopters, these are your K-52s and your Mi-28s. These require 3 from all MANPADS and Stingers on the US SHORADs. And then again, 2 hits from the other vehicle mounted systems, like on the Russian side and the SHORAD Hellfire. Now getting into the airplane kill table, I've essentially got low altitude drones, high altitude drones, standard airplanes, your armored airplanes, and your heavy airplanes here. So starting for your low altitude drones, they take 2 hits from MANPADS and 1 hit from anything else. Note, I have the SHORAD Hellfire in the table, but it cannot target airplanes. It can only target Hellfire. So again, for the US SHORADs, you want to be using this Stinger Verba column here. For the high altitude drones, because they're 15 HP, they take 3 hits from an Igla, 2 hits from other MANPADS, and 2 hits from all of the SHORAD systems. They are still 1 shot by any of the heavy IADS SAM systems. Standard airplanes are 3 hits from MANPADS and Stingers, 2 hits from SHORADs, and then 1 shot by the most exquisite SAMs, which we'll talk about here in a minute. The armored airplanes, this is your A-10 and your Su-25. They have the same HP, but 15 armor. All that really changes is how much damage they can take from anti-aircraft guns, because it doesn't change the calculus in terms of missiles. 3 hits from the Igla, 3 hits from the Stinger or the Verba, 2 hits from the vehicle-mounted SHORAD-based systems, and 1 shot from the heaviest SAMs. And then finally, your heavy airplanes, these are your cargo transports and your bombers, can take 4 to 5 hits from an Igla, which if you're hovering over top of MANPADS to take 4 to 5 hits, you deserve to get shot down. 4 hits from the Stinger or the Verba, 3 hits from most of the SHORAD systems. The Tor is the exception. In some cases, it can get a kill in 2. And then your IAD systems, your heavy SAMs, all require at least 2 hits to kill these heavy airplanes. What I've got here is a brief demo on how anti-aircraft teams spot. In this case, right, you've got 3 different targets. You've got the A-10 Thunderbolt, which is flying at low altitude with a stealth of 1. It is detectable at 3,200 meters and then remains detectable until 4,000 meters, basically once it's detected. For the MiG-35 is a high altitude aircraft, so it's detectable at 4,000 meters, again, radar off, right? And remains detectable until 4,000 meters with the radar off. For the F-117 Nighthawk with a stealth rating of 1.75, it gets picked up at 2280 meters and then disappears again at 4000. So once it's detected, it is treated as if it does not have any stealth anymore, as long as line of sight isn't broken. So you'll see this S300 maintains coverage. This is primarily because the Nighthawk's turn radius is so small. I can't position it where it would be initially detected, but then clear that 4,000 meter radius. But either way, this is what spotting and tracking looks like for an S300 with its radar off. All right, so now to demonstrate the bonuses of radar, we've essentially moved those 3 airplanes back a little bit. When you turn radar on, it's with the hotkey Z. It adds 25% to your low altitude detection. So that's low altitude airplanes and helicopters, and adds 100% or doubles your high altitude detection. It also extends the range of your overall tracking. So I'm going to turn the radar on here, and all of a sudden these airplanes will begin popping up. So the MiG-35 will stay tracked until 8,000 meters. The A-10 Thunderbolt shows up right at 4,000 meters and actually stays tracked. I think this is consistent with other radar rules, so it's going to stay tracked until it breaks line of sight or 8,000 meters. Same thing with the Nighthawk. Once it is identified, which is at 4560, I believe, based on the previous math, because now its max tracking range is 8,000 meters. Remember, stealth goes to 1, and it's at high altitude. It'll actually stay tracked, as will the A-10, while the MiG-35 is far enough away that it continues to get past that 8,000 meter range. So if we shut down the radar here, you see all of these aircraft disappear. The A-10 is the only one that comes close enough to be detected without radar. We turn the radar on again, and again, these aircraft should start to show up. MiG right at 8,000 meters, A-10 at 4,000 meters, and Nighthawk at 4,500 meters. The important thing here, this is just another point to emphasize line of sight. If you have clear line of sight, you can track aircraft far greater than their initial detection. So this is how you're going to get trades and kills on aircraft that are trying to get away. As long as line of sight is not broken, you can track and continue to shoot at them, even though they're at ranges far past your initial detection range, especially for the stealth jets. That's really, really relevant. For your SHORAD systems, keep in mind that they almost always prefer low altitude. And so with radar off, most of them can see 3,200 meters. With radar on, 4,000 meters, even though they can't see at high altitude. So this Guardian becomes visible at 2560 because it's got a stealth rating of 1.25, and will remain visible until the Tunguska reaches 3,200 meters. Because once it's been spotted again, its stealth rating kind of disappears. Then if we turn radar on, this detection range will get extended to 4,000 divided by 1.25. It'll get spotted here about 3,200 meters with the radar on. Yep. And then we'll remain spotted as we back away until we get to 4,000 meters. So remember, helicopters, regardless of whether or not the helicopter is high or low altitude, are considered low altitude. The low altitude maneuver for helicopters only really allows you to break line of sight behind obstacles on the ground. All right, now we can finally get into a discussion of the actual anti-air systems. So I'm going to start with the IADS, your heavy SAMs, your long-range SAMs, and there are basically 2 categories within this. There are the what I call one-shot SAMs, and then the multi-engagement SAM. So the one-shot SAMs, on the Russian side, it's the S300 variants, right? The Anti from the Guard Tank Brigade, the Favorit from the Motorized Infantry, and then the Buk M2 from the Mechanized Infantry. And you can tell they're one-shot basically because 25 damage, and then in the case of the Buk M2, 20 damage. But with that explosive penetration, the only thing that this won't one-shot are those heavy aircraft and the aircraft with armor, right? Because aircraft, remember, almost don't have an armor value. These long-range SAMs, it's important to note, none of them actually are capable of attacking helicopters. So their sole purpose here is to deny the enemy the use of airplanes. And really, in this case, what you're trying to do with these one-shot systems is put them in a position to destroy the airplane before it can even think about unloading its cargo. So you're not even trying to trade, you're just trying to steal points from the enemy outright. The important things here, in some cases, there might be options in the customization to up armor. That's up to you if you really care about snipers on the back line or artillery being able to come in and knock out your SAMs. But the most important stat here is going to be your optics. And then obviously all of these systems heavily dependent on radar. So the vision range here, you can see it's really tilted towards high altitude. Low altitude still decent at 3,200 meters, but high altitude range at 4,000. With radar on, low altitude range extends 25%, so that'll go out to 4,000 meters, and is doubled at high altitude, so it'll go out to 8,000 meters. As you can see, that's kind of the detection range, and then you have the range of the missiles themselves, which follow the same rules. So it says high altitude range 4,000 meters. With the radars on, with something spotted, these can shoot out to 8,000 meters. And then something else to consider here, these one-shot SAMs, you always want to pay attention to the guidance here and the multi-target capability. But you'll notice all the one-shot SAMs say semi-active. And what that means is that you have to be able to maintain radar contact between the launcher and the target until the missile hits the target, as opposed to terminal guidance, which we'll talk about in the next bit. This means that if the enemy comes in with a seed aircraft and you turn your radar off, even if the missile's in the air, the missile will go haywire and won't actually strike the target, as opposed to terminal guidance where that's not always the case. So something to keep in mind, you can effectively be suppressed with these systems if they force you to turn your radars off. On the Russian side, the best examples of these are the S-300 Anti from the Guards Tank Brigade. Highly recommend you upgrade to the 4-missile package. It takes away slightly 500 meters from the range performance, but having 4 of these missiles means you spend less time reloading, and it can also better defend itself from inbound cruise missiles or seed weapons. For the Favorit, I highly recommend you go with the straight upgrade here. It's still got 4 rockets and gets a little bit of additional range at the cost of additional points, but the 4 rockets is really nice. Worth noting that the Buk M2 from the Mechanized Infantry is very inexpensive, but if you upgrade it, it only has 3,000 meter range. If you upgrade it to the M3, that actually takes it away from being a one-shot system, so we'll talk about that later. But if you need it for the one-shot air defense, you have to leave it as the M2 option. On the US side, you only have one option that fits this. It is the Patriot PAC-2 from the Armored Brigade Specialization. We'll talk about it later, but if you go armored and you don't have PAC-2s in your deck, you are really hurting the rest of your team. Now, once we get past the one-shot systems into the multi-target engagement systems, things get a little bit wonky. On the US side, really, you have the Patriot PAC-3s. You have the PAC-3 and the PAC-3 MSE from the Stryko Cavalry Regiment Specialization. They can be upgraded with a wide, really a huge number of missiles. The missiles have slightly shorter range, but it's worth noting that the system itself still has full 4,000 meters high altitude range with the radar off, and 8,000 with the radar on. These may seem a little redundant to be in the same specialization, and they kind of are, but the benefit here is that, one, the missiles are terminal guidance, which means that once they launch and acquire a target, they can home in from there. You can also direct the missiles to focus on a target. Some of these, the PAC-3 MSC with 12 missiles and the PAC-3 with 16 missiles also get 2 missiles per target, multi-targets, can handle up to 3 targets at a time. So pretty good at kind of managing really hairy engagements early. These are actually really nice systems to get up for the air attacks for that exact reason, because they can provide a lot of supporting fires. But if you go back, the damage at only 16, these are basically only one-shotting drones. These are not going to one-shot any of the aircraft on the game, and they can't even target helicopters. So at this point, you need some assistance. You either need 2 hits, you need additional air defense, or your fighters to do some work for them to be max effective. On the Russian side, your multi-shot launchers really start with the Buk M3 from the Mechanized Infantry Brigade. You can see it gets 6 rockets, but the damage comes down. Where is it? To 19. So it'll do a lot of damage, but it won't one-shot really any airplanes. And it does switch, though, to terminal guidance. So a little bit better at dealing with multiple targets. And then you have these kind of midway systems. You've got the Tor, right, which is semi-active but can handle several targets. You've got this other Tor, same thing, for multiple targets. The downside to these systems, though, is they're clearly specialized for lower altitude. So they're really, really good against helicopters, but they are not really, like, we're getting out of the realm of IADS and closer into SHORAD with these particular systems. So what I'm going to demonstrate here before we get into too many of the other systems is a way you can use your IADS systems during the air attacks phase. And this is something I call bounding your IADS forward. So in this case, I've got one system that's just come out of the spawn point, has really good line of sight. So as soon as I unpause this, I'm going to have it set up its radar here, while his buddy, who has terrible line of sight, is going to move forward to the location where it can support. And then I'm going to basically alternate radar, again hitting Z, to have these systems kind of move up, take a couple shots, move to another location. That way they're resistant to seed and can support the initial air attacks. So taking these off, hold fire, and let's go here. So radar on, detect some of the systems. There we go. We get a hit. Some additional launches. Now this guy's in a spot where you can see, so I'm going to turn his radar on. This guy, his magazine is empty and, well, infinite ammo. He's cleaned everything up. But now you can see this guy's radar on. He's covering everything. His magazine would be empty, so I'm going to take him off, have him resupply, come back to a different spot. He's got good line of sight. Radar back on, and now I can bound this system forward. Right, and this way you can have overlapping coverage, you can manage the logistics and resupply, and you can support the air attacks. And then in this example from a game that I was playing, I brought a Strike Eagle in low and on afterburner for a cluster bombing run. So the enemy's IAD system wasn't able to engage it before the strike, but immediately post-strike, the Strike Eagle has no shot, gets one shot, even though it's able to drop its payload. So speaking of SHORADs, let's go through some of the SHORAD options here. And SHORAD stands for Short Range Air Defense. And these vary between like mobile stabilized radar-based launchers, and in the case of some elements, basically mobile vehicle-based infrared, like MANPADS style launchers with a little bit of additional capacity and armor. And the purpose of SHORADs is really to be highly mobile and to move with your units and protect them from airborne, like local airborne threats, right? And if you look at some of the details, we've got the LAV AD up here from the Marine Corps Specialization, and it's a really effective SHORAD system. You can see the Stinger can target both helicopters and aircraft. It's a fire and forget infrared guided missile, which is really nice. The optics are not as good at high range. You can see everything's geared towards low range. In this case, because it's firing infrared missiles, it doesn't even have a radar, but it's able to move with your armor and protect them, particularly against helicopters. It also includes this 25 millimeter minigun, that serves as an anti-aircraft gun that does a lot of additional damage and can also provide it some on-the-ground protection. So when we talk about SHORADs, that's essentially what I'm getting at. Like, what are the units that can move with your vehicles to support your pushes, can move past the protective bubble provided by your long-range IADS? And on the US side, there are several examples here. LAV, obviously, for the Marine Corps Specialization. You've got the Stryker M SHORAD from the Stryker Cavalry Regiment. This is also really nice with the Stinger pods. The Hellfires, it's worth noting, can actually target helicopters as well, but they lose the ability to target airplanes. So this might be something that you're looking at with the Stryker, because you get one Stinger pod, one Hellfire pod. It gives you some versatility. It's also got the SHORAD anti-aircraft gun. From the Armored Specialization, very similar. You also have the M6 Linebacker, which starts with Stingers, but you can upgrade it with the SHORAD and with the Hellfire. The SHORAD gun just really improves its ability to deal with helicopters and also missiles. I can do some missile intercept, which gets it into kind of like a point defense role, but we can talk about that a little bit later as well. And then the last thing is you've got this multi-missile launcher. In this case, it's got Stingers. You can upgrade it to have Sidewinders if you want it to be able to tackle missiles and have some additional range. And actually, the Sidewinders are pretty much a straight upgrade over the Stingers. And when we talk about damage values against some of these units, the Sidewinders are going to be better. It just costs you more points. So again, kind of a mobile system. It's got a radar that it can use to detect and extend its optical range. So those are your real examples from the US side. You also have slam rams and Avengers, but really it's just about having something, especially if you've got a very mobile deck and you need some local defense against helicopter counter pushes. That's really what SHORADs are for. The US SHORADs are not particularly good at dealing with airplanes just because their range is so short, and they only do, for the most part, they're all based on the Stinger platform, so they only do 8 damage per shot. So you're looking at 3 hits on an airplane. You really need a combined approach to deal with airplanes. However, on some of these systems like the Bradley SHORAD or the Stryker SHORAD, they can really start to deal with helicopters through a combination of armor, the active protection to help deal against helicopter-based missiles coming in. You've got the anti-aircraft gun that will slowly chip away. You've got Stingers. The nice thing about the SHORAD anti-aircraft gun, obviously the countermeasures don't work against it, so it's able to continuously do damage. And so you can start to salvo weapons at the enemy helicopters to deal with them, versus something like an Avenger that's just got a couple of Stinger launchers and still is going to need 3 or so hits to kill an enemy helicopter. Now, on the Russian side, there are a number of different options that fall into the SHORAD category, but then also kind of have a hybrid approach with point defense. And so every specialization within the Russian military has good options for air defense. The Sosna from the Guard Tank Brigade, this thing's awesome. It has 18 surface-to-air missiles. They're semi-active, which is a downside, but it doesn't actually require radar to work, so it is very resistant to seed. So essentially, you just have to maintain vision for these missiles to hit at 12.5 damage per shot. These are going to 2-shot aircraft, 2-shot most helicopters, and 1-shot some of them. So worth keeping in line around to kind of support your armored pushes. The Tor is kind of like a semi-SAM, semi-SHORAD. Again, huge magazine size and really, really good damage to 14. Plus, this has radar, so it can bump up its range. It is semi-active, so if the radar goes off or it loses sight, its missile will go haywire. For the motorized infantry, you have the OSA, which again, really high damage. So it's going to 1 or 2 shot pretty much anything out there from the US side. From the coastal troops, you've got, again, this towed Tor that's kind of like a half SAM, half SHORAD system. You can convert it to the Pantsir, which gives it the ability, the Tor and the Pantsir also act as point defense, which we'll talk about. The Strelets here you can upgrade with Iglas. This is probably the worst performing SHORAD, but this anti-aircraft gun is really, really effective and it can also be used for point defense, so don't sleep on that. And then from the mechanized infantry, you've got the Tunguska with its different variants to include the Pantsir, which is just nasty. If you look at the magazine size for all these missiles combined with the anti-aircraft gun, the Russians have a ton of options. Every specialization has at least one, some two, for mobile anti-aircraft platforms that can move with their vehicles. And this is absolutely a requirement. The purpose of these systems is to move with your tanks and prevent the enemy's aircraft, and in particular their helicopters, from being able to intercept your tank columns and do a ton of damage. In the event of enemy aircraft, right? Because there's not a lot you can do just based on the range. Even the Pantsir, which is one of the better Russian SHORAD systems. Its high altitude range is 2,000 meters with the radar on. It's 4,000 meters, 4,000 for low altitude range. These missiles, they're good, but it's still going to take 2 shots to knock down an enemy airplane. So if your opponent knows what he's doing, he'll likely get his payload away if you don't have heavy SAMs to intercept it. The benefits of these systems is it's always going to be a trade rather than just a sheer kill for your opponent. So you can really do a great job knocking them out. And then also these anti-aircraft guns, their ability to shoot at infantry, at vehicles, at other missiles. These are great multi-role vehicles, and it's worth highlighting. You should have one of these in your deck for sure, no matter what you're doing. And just one thing that I forgot, because some of the Russian SHORAD systems can actually fit into their vehicle column and not their support column. So from the VDV Brigade, their only real SHORAD is the Skrzhet. Then the Guards Tank Brigade, you also have access to the Terminator. Doesn't have missiles, but its cannon is very good at dealing with helicopters. From the mechanized infantry, you can get this nice SHORAD system, the MTLB-6MB5, which again can't target missiles, but can target helicopters and airplanes with some of the upgrades. What I've got playing in the background are just a couple examples of team SHORADs working against two enemy helicopter pushes. It's me and my teammate. I've got Bradley M6 SHORADs. He's got Lav SHORADs and Striker SHORADs. And then I've also added a killer egg with Stingers into the mix. A lot of engagements between SHORADs and helicopters come down to who shoots first and strict numbers advantage. So in an even fight, getting the first shot off can be critical. This example shows when SHORADs start on the back foot, they can't recover and they easily get overwhelmed by helicopters. All right, now I want to talk about point defense, which is a little bit of a smaller category, but it is really useful in the way it complements the rest of your air defense network. So on the US side, this is actually really clean. There are essentially two examples. There's the Centurion CRAM from the Striker Cavalry Regiment specialization. It's got this big anti-aircraft gun. And you can see here it can target everything: ground, vehicle, helicopter, missile, and aircraft. When I say point defense, the primary thing I'm concerned about is the ability to target inbound missiles. And these point defense systems, they have a radar, and the radar actually typically needs to be on for missile intercept. But the goal here is to defend yourself from enemy cruise missiles, from enemy from enemy seed missiles coming in, and defend your larger, more expensive, more capable SAM systems from inbound missiles. The other option on the US side is this PIVADS from the Armored Specialization. So if you're running the armored deck, you should really have a couple of PIVADS and in front of your PAC-2s to help basically deflect or destroy any missiles coming in targeting the PAC-2. Note that your heavy SAM systems will try to defend themselves, but they normally have a relatively slow launch time. And if they're caught, if you only have 2 of the 4 missiles in there, they might not be able to fully defend themselves. So having these point defense systems is really useful in keeping your units alive. On the Russian side, several of your SHORAD units have that point defense capability. Sometimes it's from the gun, sometimes it's from the missile, but either way, you'll see they can counter enemy missiles. So from the mechanized infantry deck, it is your Pantsir. Obviously, the Buk can defend itself slightly, but that's not really what you want to be using it for. From the coastal troops, the Strelets can actually also shoot down missiles, as well as the Pantsir SA and the Toad Tor here. From the motorized infantry, actually, there really isn't anything here. The OSA can't target missiles, and the Favorit can, but that's your long-range system. Believe it or not, the ZU-23 actually can't target inbound missiles. You would think that'd be a nice point defense system. In the Guards Tank Brigade, the only real point defense you have is the Tor M2. If you're going to use it in this, I highly suggest getting it with 16 missiles, and then just like with the US point defense systems, you just grab one of these, you put it about 1,000 meters in front of your SAMs with some clear line of sight, and it will, especially with its multi-target capability, really disrupt the enemy's ability to get after your SAMs. The airborne specialization really is the only one, VDV is the only one that really doesn't have the ability to manage this. You've got the Skrzhet, which does have some anti-air capability here. It's basically a SHORAD system, but it doesn't have the ability to do any point defense. So if you're using the VDV specialization, just keep in mind, if you have SAMs out, you're going to have to get your point defense for them from one of the other specializations. A couple of considerations for your point defense systems. First off, to maximize their effectiveness, the radar needs to be on. Now, just in their very nature, they're very resistant to seed, but watching the seed missiles come in and get destroyed can give away their positions, which leaves them vulnerable to artillery fire or even ground fire. If they are missile reliant, so like on the Russian side, if you've got Tors and you're using them for your point defense, even though they have a large kind of magazine size here with 16 to 18 SAMs, you are going to need a logistics plan to reload them, and you need to be able to pay attention to them to make sure that they don't run out of munitions and then leave your IADS systems kind of alone and unprotected. Also worth keeping, and from a control group point of view, I keep them in a separate control group from my other IADS systems, because a lot of times when seed comes in, you don't actually want to turn the radar off on these. You want them to be able to intercept. So having them on a different group than your primary anti-air can be helpful in keeping you from accidentally shutting all of your radars down at the same time. So to demonstrate a decent IADS with point defense setup, I've got an S300 anti here in the back, supported by a single Tor launcher. The radars are on, so as we go into play, I'm going to come at them with an F-16 CJ with 4 harms. And so you watch kind of what happens. The missiles have to do a little bit of deconfliction, but even with 4 missiles being launched at this setup, you'll see initially the launch happens, but the S300 is going to prioritize self-defense. The Tor is going to chip in and start knocking down some of these SAMs. Unfortunately, 1 makes it through, but now the Tor is still in a position to target the F-16. At the very least, F-16 is traded out. You'll take an F-16 for an S300 any day, and that was just with a little bit of bad luck. Now, running a similar setup here with a Pantsir as opposed to a Tor, right? And you see the S300 continues to launch first because it's going to see the jet first. And now you see the Pantsir helping with the gun. The F-16 shot down and no missiles make it through the defense network. So having that gun for point defense, really, really helpful. Now, similar demo. This time we've got a Patriot PAC-2 with 2 PIVADs, right? And so not having the missiles means that the PAC-2 is going to prioritize the self-defense, but those PIVADs do a fantastic job running down the missiles as they come in and actually do some point defense against the CJ as well. And you'd much rather lose that PIVADs than the PAC-2, even though now it's forced to reload. So last test here, running 2 CJs against 2 PAC-2s with each a PIVADs in support. As they come in, you can see the airplane's already getting launched on. One gets knocked down almost immediately. And all of those harms coming in get smoked by the point defense setup. So very effective as long as you have good dispersion and clean lines of sight. Now I'm obviously using this test map because the lines of sight are very clean, so it eliminates a lot of the distractions from terrain, but it will play a huge role in the effectiveness of your setup. Either way, having some point defense, whether they're missile or gun based, near your IADS systems will significantly improve survivability. And then make sure you're checking line of sight. Like everything's flat here, so the line of sight tool is not even showing up, but that will make a huge difference in your unit's ability to defend themselves and attack enemy aircraft as they come in. This is just an example of an ineffective point defense setup here. And really, you can just see the cloud of smoke. That used to be my Patriot PAC-2. When I went back and did the line of sight analysis, neither one of these PIVADs could actually see to the east, which is the direction where the strike was incoming. So make sure you're doing good line of sight checks with your PIVADs systems so that they can actually protect your heavy SAMs. All right, now finally we're going to talk about MANPADS, which are your infantry-based anti-aircraft rockets. As a general rule, they're all going to be infrared fire and forget, which means even if the infantry squad gets smoked, if the missile is gone, it'll continue to track to its target. They are low altitude specialists. There's no radar, so they can attack airplanes, but essentially only when they're directly overhead. What you really need to pay attention to when you're looking at these different squads is the number of launchers, right? Because a lot of these squads are actually decent infantry squads at holding ground. They usually come with a grenade launcher, a machine gun, or an AT-4 like anti-tank rocket, disposable rocket, so they can defend themselves to some extent. But their primary purpose is anti-air. From the VDV brigade, you get the Igla team, but from the Guards tank brigade, you get the Verba, which is the better of the 2 anti-air rockets for the Russians. Slightly higher penetration, slightly higher damage, essentially a Stinger with better range. But again, only 1 launcher on this squad, very small squad size. From the motorized infantry here, you've got the Igla N team. This has 2 launchers, only for personnel, so it can't defend itself. But the nice thing about the 2 launchers is you see here, the reload time 6 to 9 seconds. When you have 2 launchers, they'll stagger their launches. So instead of seeing a missile every 6 to 9 seconds, you'll see one every 3 to 5 seconds, which is nice. Keep in mind, you've also got the Spetsnaz GRU, which can load out with 2 Verbas. This is just really kind of a nasty squad. 2 Verbas plus all the other anti-infantry firepower they bring. That's always a great choice for multi-role from the motorized infantry. The coastal troops don't get any MANPADS options. And for the mechanized infantry, you have your Motor Strelky Igla squad. It's really a rifle squad with an attached Igla, so keep that in mind. It might be worth having some of these in your deck and using them like motor rifles. We'll talk a little bit about employment there, but those are the Russian anti-aircraft teams. On the US side, following the theme from the Coastals, the Marines do not get an anti-aircraft team. The Armor Brigade gets Mech Rifle AA, which actually, I mean, they're a little bit more expensive than Mech Riflemen, but you can see they still come with a machine gun. They're basically just swapping their AT4 capability for a Stinger. Again, only one launcher. The Airborne Infantry Stinger team, this is the best one for the US. It's got the Stinger, so 80 penetration, 8 damage, and it's got 2 launchers in the squad. Only a 4-man squad, so not super durable, but the 2 launchers is really nice. For the Striker Cavalry Regiment, you get the Troopers AA, very similar setup as the Mechanized Riflemen. So very similar to the Troopers squad, but they swap the Javelin for a single Stinger. And then on the soft side, you actually get the Ranger Stinger, which is really a Ranger squad with a Stinger attached. It is the soft Stinger, so it's got a little bit 2,000 meters greater range. And you've got the Special Tactics team, which gets an extended range Stinger as well. But again, only one launcher. So these MANPADS teams are best used in concert with other elements, whether it's SHORAD, in particular SHORAD or Point Defense, and with other vehicles. And they're essentially there to expand your anti-helicopter firepower. They can help with airplanes, but there are very rare situations where these MANPAD systems are going to be super effective against an airplane. Normally they'd have to be massed and the airplane would have to fly really directly overhead. What these are best used for is kind of spreading them out either outside objectives, on your flanks, around supply points, anywhere you're really worried about a big helicopter spam push. These can do just enough damage and they're just durable enough, especially in cover, that they can push away a helicopter advance or support your vehicles. You don't want to leave them, you can leave them in buildings, but you don't want to leave them on objective points because that makes them very vulnerable to artillery. The biggest advantage to these teams is being able to set them on the edge of a forest. They have very simple line of sight compared to some of the vehicles. And with the concealment bonus that they get, being infantry, so 1.75 stealth, in cover, they can very easily reach out of forests, reach out of buildings, and attack helicopters before you really even know that they're there. That's the best use for these. I highly recommend that you have an option for a MANPADS team in your deck, no matter what you're doing, because whether you're pushing or you need to hold terrain, having these guys available to you is really important in preventing the enemy from just overrunning all of your gains with a quick helicopter push. With this demo here, just kind of showing how MANPADS teams spread out in cover do fairly well against helicopter pushes, even defeating some of the decoys, the countermeasures, etc., right? Sometimes these engagements, like RNG has a lot to do with these engagements because of the ECM content of these helicopters. And you see your MANPADS teams do take some damage, but even in this case, like the amount of points you're trading out makes it worth it. Just remember to keep them spread out so they can't be overwhelmed by a single helicopter. A similar example, but now we are in the wood line, and you see that the initial kind of strike bonus that the MANPADS teams get from being concealed in the wood line helps them quite a bit, but a lot of the engagement is going to come down to, again, the RNG with the countermeasures that these helicopters have and whether or not these shots fully penetrate. So as you see the riflemen aiming as they take rounds, they're going to shock and panic as well. That shot kind of missed, but I think you'll take 4 90-point riflemen for 2 300-point attack helicopters. And actually there, 4 MANPADS teams beat the 2 best helicopters in the game. So worth keeping in mind, if you've got a 2-to-1, you've got cover and concealment, your MANPADS teams can do quite a bit of damage. All right, one more quick demo here to show the potential value of MANPADS against aircraft as long as they have cover. Notice that they're not shooting because they don't sense any threat from this aircraft, so they won't automatically come off hold fire. When you release them, though, the salvos come out And 3 hits to kill the airplane, but pretty effective. Not a lot of time for the airplane to respond. That's the advantage of using MANPADS, right? If the airplane is coming in, by the time the actual rocket's launched, it doesn't have a lot of time to jink, to hit afterburner, to use countermeasures. So they typically are pretty effective, but only within the very limited range that they have. I want to talk briefly about the deck building considerations. So here I've got an Armor VDV specialization deck. This is really, I'm relying on armor and infantry to do a lot of pushing and holding. You see, I don't have much in the way of aircraft. I have some helicopters, but not a ton. But because I have the armor specialization, right, and I'm a good team player, I'm bringing the S300 V4, the 4x missiles. I got 2 of them in the deck. I've got 2 Cessnas. These are my SHORAD systems. They're going to support my vehicle pushes. I've got tours for point defense for my S300. And I've also got the BMPT Terminators. These are really nice at like all-rounders because the main gun can also deal with some helicopters. So between the Terminators and the Cessnas, I've got a lot of support for my T-80s, my T-90s for armor pushes. And then, again, because I'm a good teammate, I have 4 of the Verba teams here for MANPADS to help consolidate gains. Taking a look at my other primary Russian deck here, you can see kind of the same layout, right? I've got my IADS systems, I've got my SHORAD systems, I've got a little bit of point defense available, and then I've got Iglas to help hold any ground that I take. So again, the idea is to have layered options for your air defense, so you can fill in wherever your team needs you to. And then in the case of the S300s, if you've got the opportunity to bring these one-shot heavy IADS systems in, make sure you do so, because in a balanced team, there aren't going to be a ton of these specializations, or not everyone's going to have this option available to them. On my favorite US deck here, again, very similar setup. I've got a Patriot Pack 2. Because this is more of a assault deck than a support deck, this is less of a requirement than the SHORAD, so I only have 1 of them in the deck. But you'll still see if you watch my gameplay, I get them out early and often. I've got PIVADs for my point defense, and I've got SHORADs to push with my armor. I also have these Mech Rifleman AA. They also provide a pretty big bonus in that I can use them to bring out my AMPV, which is the primary carrier for all of my infantry that I use to push. So just one example there. All right, now to show you an example of a deck where your anti-air is actually kind of a struggle, I have a couple things here. So this is an airborne and soft specialization, so no heavy anti-air really available to me at all. So a couple things. I got the Special Tactics team and the Stinger team for a lot of MANPADS that I use to support infantry pushes. I've got an Avenger is essentially my SHORAD, and Slam Ram is like the SHORAD point defense. Now I've got it with the AIM 120 and AIM 9 loadout here. That allows it to actually target missiles and serve as that point defense, and gives me some additional pressure pushing against that the Avenger can't deal with, right? I need other spots in the support deck for artillery, which is why I don't have more of these. Again, it's kind of a stretch, but I am significantly supporting the anti-air fight. I have my AH-6 Killer Eggs loaded out with Stinger AA missiles. These are a super cheap platform, and they trade very, very well against enemy helicopters. So 3 of these up against a couple Mi-28s or K-52s will actually do a pretty good job. They also come with these miniguns so they can handle recce teams that they find in the woods, and they're only 65 points, so if you lose them, not the end of the world. I additionally have 2 F-22s loaded out with 4 JADAMs. These are air superiority fighters, and while I'm not really going to talk about air superiority in airplanes and anti-air, this is what I'm bringing to support the team. I can pay a heavy air tax early and win some early game engagements at range. Also worth noting, the F-35, the Strike Eagle, they all have anti-air in their loadout, and the A-10 as well carries Sidewinders just in case. So this is how, if you have specializations that aren't really built towards heavy air defense setup, you can still support and provide for your team. And last example here, just a reminder that if helicopters get too close, pretty much any weapon can be lethal. You'll see this Ka-52 runs up on 2 Thunderbolts, gets too tight, and immediately gets knocked out. All right, let's just wrap some stuff up here. While I'm chatting, I'm going to put up the damage table one more time so you can see what you can expect different weapon systems to do in terms of damage to the various targets. At a minimum, everyone on your team, every deck needs to bring something to the fight. If you have a specialization with a one-shot IADS system available to you and it's not in your deck, I'm sorry, you're wrong. If you have those big capable IADS systems, make sure you bring some sort of point defense to support them. If you're running an assault deck, make sure you have lots of SHORADS options to support your armor and infantry, and make sure they're redundant enough that if they get knocked out, you can immediately bring additional support on and you're not waiting for the full cooldown. Make sure every deck you have a MANPADS option to protect your points, protect your flanks, and protect your supply. Remember, Broken Arrow is about trades, right? If the enemy's team wants to use their expensive airplanes, make them pay for it. In an ideal world, your network is so overpowering that the airplane dies before it even thinks about dropping its payload. But at a minimum, you want to make sure that aircraft is traded out. In addition to being more or less even on points, this will significantly lengthen the cooldown for its return to battle. It's something like 4 minutes for if it just returns and needs to be refitted versus 10 minutes if it's destroyed. So to remember, to breathe the free air of victory, invest in your air defense. That's going to do it for us here, folks. I hope you enjoyed this one. Hit me up in the comments down below if I missed anything, and we'll see y'all in the next one.